What a way to start the last show. That's a Rubber Boot Foot Fetish for you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm playing a song for you. They're going to play another one a little later at the end of the show. But as you know, you're actually watching Time Tunnel TV. This is famous for taking people from history where we bring them into the studio and talk to them. And today's guest, we have a real treat for you. Yes, we have the one and only H.P. Lovecraft on the show. But if you don't know too much about this character, then watch the VT and find out more.
When people talk about the big names in horror, many names come up, like Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker, but one that might not come up as much is H.P. Lovecraft. Most people don't know his name, even though he's one of the most influential horror writers of the 21st century, and in this documentary I'm going to tell you more about him. He then went to live with his grandparents in Providence, Massachusetts. He was a withdrawn child due to his semi-invalidism. He spent much of his time reading, which started his lifelong love of books and introduced him to some of his biggest inspirations, such as Edgar Allan Poe. He also had a keen interest in chemistry and astronomy, which are also shown in his works. When he went to school, he was far ahead of many of the other students, and was considered a child prodigy. He was able to recite poetry by the age of 3 and able to write simple poems by 6, and also enjoyed reading simplified versions of books such as the Iliad and the Odyssey. As well, he has an interest in Gothic horror. Because he was so advanced, he was homeschooled by private tutors. When he was older, he became interested in amateur journalism and sent off many articles to local newspapers. A lot of them were unpaid, but were an effort to try and secure more permanent work. He later moved to New York and met his wife, Sonia Green, and they moved in together in her apartment in Brooklyn. During this time, Lovecraft managed to secure no proper work, and Sonia fell into ill health. They later had a divorce, and Lovecraft moved back in with his family members in Providence. When he moved back in Providence, he wrote a great deal of his work. He got most of his work published in pulp magazines at the time, and as well as doing this, he took up ghostwriting for many famous people such as Harry Houdini. But during this time, he was making little money. He got poorer and poorer, and eventually he is diagnosed with cancer of the small intestine. And on the 15th March 1937, he died. Even though he may not have seemed important at the time, his influence, like many great people, was felt more in his death than in his life. His work is highly regarded and is even cited as being key influences to other influential horror writers, such as Stephen King, writer of the Dark Tower saga, The Shining and The Green Mile. His works are highly regarded as some of the best horror stories ever written, and especially the Cthulhu mythos about the Elder God imprisoned under the sea and the mythical dead city of Rylith, and Yog-Sothoth, the Watcher at the Edge, the being that is all-time, the all-seeing, the all-knowing, and the all-encompassing. The Necronomicon, the Black Grimoire of black magic and forgotten lore, are very commonly referenced in pop culture, even if many people may not know about the source material. His works, the themes and the vivid imagery used has made them interesting and viable for adaptations and usage, and have been adapted for film, theatre and video games. Many things hold influences to him, such as the video games Amnesia and the Call of Cthulhu, and there's even a tabletop role-playing game based around the mythos. There are even songs inspired by the works, such as Metallica's instrumental The Call of Cthulhu and Dream Theater's Dark Eternal Night. His influence has reached over many aspects of popular culture and all forms of media. Even though he may not sound important, well, watched TV shows and films, read books, or even played video games with his influence without even knowing of them. So remember to spare a thought for one of the greatest horror writers of all time, H.P. Lovecraft.
Well, there we go. Back to basics. And we have the man himself here. HP, how are you doing? And where did it all start for you?
I'm doing quite well. Well, I suppose it all started when I was a child. We grew up quite poor. And my father was sectioned. He was put into a mental hospital when I was 3. So that had quite a influence on me, on some of my later writings. Not to mention when my mother was also sectioned later in her life, but that wasn't until I was in my teens. But I think mostly what my love of horror comes from is when my grandfather used to sit me down and write me Gothic horror stories, and he'd tell me his own, and he'd read me stuff of Poe and other great Gothic writers, and it was a really sweet time with my grandfather. He passed away, and when he passed away, we became increasingly more poor because of mishandling of his estate. But I feel that's where my love of horror comes from.
So effectively, the influences of horror were entwined with your demise of your mother and your father, plus obviously the sort of fictitious sort of stuff your grandfather wrote in. So you could always go back to your early influences to actually influence what you were writing yourself.
Yeah, I feel that my writing always reflected my life at that period. Not to say that because I write horror I was eternally unhappy. It's not true. I was happy for the majority of my life until the end.
So you had a talent for writing anyway. I mean, how was your early education? I mean, you were quite an educated man as the years progressed, but how were you treated as a younger child?
Well, it may have seemed like I was educated, but I did not attend school, at least not much. A year or so, I did a year of third grade, and after that I went to high school once or twice, but I never really clicked with the whole school thing, and back in those days it wasn't mandatory.
No, it wasn't, was it, I suppose? I mean, let's face it, what was one of the first things you had published? Can you remember back to one of the first major novels or the major book you wrote? What was the major thing that...
One of the first things that I really feel reflected me and not one of my Poe-type stories was Dagon. Dagon is it's a short story, probably only about 2 or 3 pages long, that it's just about a man who gets lost at sea and encounters an obelisk and a giant monster. But I feel that was my first true piece of H.P. Lovecraft fiction. So you thought to yourself, here, I'm onto something here. So who was your audience? Who did you actually show this first epic novel to, or these 3 pages of work? Mostly my peers. My family wouldn't really get it. My aunts disapproved of me writing horror, but I had a lot of writer friends. I did a lot of work for ghostwriting, such as Harry Houdini, who I wrote Under the Pyramids for. But a lot of my writer friends gave me positive reinforcement. Thought there was something to these stories, if a little dark, but they thought there was something to it. So you've always from the dark side anyway. I mean, I suppose obviously it wasn't a job then, was it? Way back in the early 20th century or late 19th century. What was your parents? What did they want you to actually do rather than the writing? Well, my dad was a traveling salesman. A little too traveling, in fact. The reason he was sectioned was because he contracted syphilis and went bad. But I think my dad intended something like that for me. My mother was unemployed for her entire life, but I think they wanted me to grow up, be a salesman, own a shop, get a job in an office or something like that, and just it never clicked with me. I preferred reading. I read from a very young age, and books were my calling, I felt. Right. Very interesting stuff, Mr. Lovecraft. What we'll do, we'll speak to you a little later on. We've got loads more to talk about, so thanks for that. But what we've got to do now, folks, we've got to go live over to the ED News studio with our friend Dale, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the year of 1927.
Hi, this is Dale Coleman, and the year is 1927. Here are some stories in Japan. Around 29,825 people were killed by an earthquake measuring 7.6 on the Richter scale. Our condolences go out to those who have lost loved ones. Fritz Lang releases his highly influential film, Metropolis. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out because it's definitely a classic. Also in Sweden, the first Volvo car is made. They have a bright future ahead of them. The League of Nations abolishes all human slavery. The Jazz Singer, the first full-length film using sound, is released. It is a huge success. There have been reports of some people standing up and cheering, while others even fainting due to excitement. Finally, Leon Trotsky has been expelled from the Soviet Communist Party, leaving Joseph Stalin in control. It's hard to argue with a moustache like that. Now we are going over to our live news reporter, James, who's on the flight of the Spirit of St. Louis.
Hello, this is James Atkins reporting live from Paris, France, circa 1927, to report on the first non-stop transatlantic flight done by Charles Lindbergh. We tried to get him for an interview, but he ran right past us yelling about needing to use the bathroom. The flight took a staggering 33 hours, 30 minutes to complete, starting at the Roosevelt Airfield in Long Island, America, and ended here at the Le Bourget Airfield in Paris just minutes ago. You can see the airplane behind me that made this Herculean journey. It may not look like much, but it's the first plane to fly over the Atlantic Ocean without stopping, so it has to be something special. In fact, it's in line to make a nice bit of money, $25,000 to be precise, and show us a bright new future for all of aeronautics. This is James Atkins reporting live from 1927, signing off.
Thanks for that, James. Well, that's all the time we have today. This is 1927, and I've been your host, Dale Coleman. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks very much for that, Dale. OK, now we're back and it's time to have our distinguished guest here, our lovely friend, Mr. H.P. Lovecraft. What do you think of our smashing band? We've dedicated him to you, the Rubber Boot Foot Fetish from Iceland. What do you think of them?
Not quite what I would listen to in my time, but I think I could get into it.
Right, anyway, what I want to do now is focus on one of your most memorable moments in time. Can you tell us the name of that book, your most memorable one?
I think the one that everyone remembers for me is called Cthulhu.
Cthulhu. I'm very wrong there. But yeah, Cthulhu. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that came into being?
Well, I'd done a couple of mythos books before, but Call of Cthulhu was really the start of what people have come to say is the Cthulhu mythos. It's basically a giant shared universe where lots of bad things happen to good people. Cthulhu is a great old one. It's basically a gigantic alien with an octopus for a head, dragon wings, and well, very big grabby arms that he likes to grab people's souls with. He's there we go. You can see him there. Scary fella. But he resides in the sunken city of Rilya. That is sunken under the sea, a gigantic emerald city, and is one day prophesied to rise and conquer the entire human race and rule over it as their overlord. And the Call of Cthulhu is just a chronicling of three tales. One is a tale about discovering the Cthulhu cults. Mm-hmm. The second is what the cults do. And who they worship, obviously Cthulhu, and seeing some of Cthulhu's Starspawn, and then the third tale is of a man who on a ship who accidentally discovers Rilya and awakens Cthulhu, only to stop Cthulhu by ramming a boat into his head, which in fact, Call of Cthulhu is one of the only stories I've wrote where the good guys win, I suppose you could say. They don't really win in my story, but they, no. Well, the guy didn't get killed. He went insane, but he didn't get killed.
So Cthulhu, at the time of writing, it wasn't particularly that popular, was it? It's now influencing current culture, isn't it? And such bands as Metallica and such, and video games, if you're familiar with video games. I know you've been down so much there. Well, the influence games that you can play on screens similar to this now, and Cthulhu has been one of the main sort of things. Did you think that you'd be inspiring future generations with your works?
No, really. At the end of the day, I was just trying to get a paycheck. I was just trying to live. But I'm glad that my stories spoke to people.
And hence, we do know you went through an amount of poverty where you were actually writing sort of articles and for different sort of publications, especially newspapers in America, and you weren't getting paid for them. This was all voluntary.
Well, my life was always about my craft, but at the end of the day, you guys got to eat.
Correct,
so
yeah.
I wrote articles. I did a lot of ghostwriting, as I said before, for people like Houdini, for other writers. But I think no matter what I did, no matter how many articles I wrote, no matter how many books I ghosted for, you could always tell it was written by me.
I mean, was the poverty part of the breakup of your wife when you moved to New York with your wife?
I moved to New York and married Sonia, but it fell apart quickly when she ran a hat shop, mm-hmm. and so you can only imagine how long that lasted. But the shop went bust. I couldn't find a job. She couldn't find a job, so she moved to Cleveland, and we got divorced.
And unfortunately, the finances drove you apart. Well, the lack of, if you like, the lack of finances. So at any point, did you have any sort of reasonable amount of money?
I think when I very first started writing before, after I kind of moved back to Providence, I had a bit of money, but that kind of fell apart when my popularity waned.
Well, I'll tell you something, you've definitely influenced a lot of people in the 21st century, including these guys behind us, the Rubber Boot Foot Fetish. And what we're going to do, say thank you very much to you, Mr. H.P. Lovecraft. And this is the very last episode of the current series. So thanks to all our guests, thanks to the crew and everybody involved here today. So on behalf of myself, Graham Wolstenholme, and everybody else, I'll leave you in the capable hands of these young gentlemen here. Thanks for watching.